Hey guys, Argent here, with a character profile of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think it's Obi-Wan Kenobi's fate to kind of always be second fiddle. As a character, he profoundly is extremely unambitious. In many respects, he's a romantic, an idealist, etc. He more or less believes that he can just be a good man, he can just do his duty, he can just be honest, moral, and upright, and things will work out for him and work out for the things that he believes in. He's more or less kind of a good, decent man in a very indecent time. And if the world was composed of men like him, then things would function pretty good. The problem is, much like a lot of modern politicians, guys like Mitt Romney, guys like, I guess to some extent, Ben Carson, guys like Peter Hitchens, to some extent, someone like Ron Paul, just any of these kind of like conservative politicians who are very very decent people who really are not corrupt or immoral or bad in their personal lives, but are disasters or would be disastrous if they ran things. Because this is a time for, I think, as Millennial Woes put it, radicalism. This is a time for people who have the will to power, who are willing to seize power, who are willing to do what Pinochet or Franco did, and seize power and try to salvage a bad situation by any means necessary. And that's kind of the thing with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He just tries to be a decent man and not punch above his station in a time when society's collapsing. And ultimately, his efforts are largely pointless. He's remembered as a great hero. He wins the respect of everyone around him. But unlike Anakin, Palpatine, or even any of the rebel characters like Luke Skywalker, he doesn't ultimately really achieve much. Whether he even exists is not that important to the galactic history, except for the fact that he happens to gravitate towards people who actually matter. But none of that really matters to him personally. I mean, you could have just put someone else in his place and the outcome would have been more or less the same. He's basically accepted a role as being second rate, as being not important. And like I said, that would be good in another era. Perhaps during a couple decades before the events of the kind of the crisis that starts with the Trade Federation, with Palpatine's rise to power. Maybe a century before then, if there had been more people like Obi-Wan who are willing to work within the system, who are willing to fight with ideals, and serve as a model to others, to inspire other decent men to try and serve. He might have made a difference, but in the era he's in, you don't need another bland, ballless, kind of idealistic public servant. You need someone like Palpatine. Or even if you don't, if you support the Republic, you need a strong, decisive figure. Someone who's willing to just take the world as it is and try to conform the world as it is and reconcile that as best they can with some kind of abstract values. But Obi-Wan really isn't willing to do that. He just basically does what he's told, does what he's ordered. And he is fated to be in the service of people who are frankly less competent than himself. Mace Windu and Yoda have no idea what the hell they're doing. If you notice with regards to the Jedi Council, Obi-Wan and Anakin do everything of any value. They seem to fight the entire Clone War by themselves, whereas Yoda just kind of sits around or hangs out with the Wookiees. Yoda is so obsessed with his non-action, his pacifism, and his detachment from the world. He's completely unwilling to do anything the least bit pragmatic. He's unwilling to even really lead the Jedi Order he's supposed to be in charge of. Mace Windu is much the same. The Jedi Order has leadership who are not interested in leading. They have guys, like I said, like Yoda, like Mace Windu, like the other Jedi, who are not interested in leading, who are not interested in politics, who aren't interested in even preserving their own position. They're so passive, so bland, so ballless, so lacking in any sort of ambition whatsoever that they shouldn't be anywhere near leadership. Because to be a leader, you have to be pragmatic. You can't just be a pure idealist. Ideally, you should be balancing idealism with pragmatism. You need both because unfortunately, the real world isn't a place where you can just talk about your ideas and expect everyone to go along with them. You have to, and this is goes back to some other videos I made. When kings were crowned, they were given a globe with like a cross on it in one hand and a sword in another. To be a leader is to balance the dictates of heaven, that is, idealism, romanticism, morality, faithfulness to God, and the sword, which is earth, which is compulsion, which is force. You have to be able to balance the two of them. And Obi-Wan, to a certain extent, I think does better than the rest of the Jedi. And really, he's willing to do things for the greater good, but he's not willing to act on his own. And to a certain extent, he kind of becomes the Jedi's go-to guy because they're so just passive and so just kind of bloated under their own arrogance and their own self-importance that they have to turn to basically kind of like lieutenants like Obi-Wan to deliver. That's why Obi-Wan and Anakin seem to do everything, because the rest of the Jedi don't have the ability to get their hands dirty anymore. And he kind of picked this up from his master, Qui-Gon Jinn. But Qui-Gon Jinn was also a lot like Obi-Wan. He was kind of a he kind of played by the rules, but he also kind of was a bit independent, but he wasn't really able to do either well enough. Qui-Gon wasn't willing to kind of get on the Jedi Council and try to reform it and try to make things better, and he wasn't willing to do what Dooku did and resign from the Jedi Council and try to make change in the secular realm. Instead, he's just kind of an ineffectual figure who is important only because he has friends like Yoda, he was Anakin's master, etc. But as I said, he could have really been anybody, and it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. It's a bit like the relationship between Anakin and Ashoka. Anakin's Padawan has no effect on him as a character, and it could have been anyone. Luke could have been his Padawan, well, Luke's his son. Mara Jade could have been his Padawan. Anyone could have been his Padawan, and it really wouldn't have mattered. And we see this also, this whole attitude of Obi-Wan in the original trilogy. He just kind of lets Vader kill him. He's not really willing to be important to the rebellion, despite the fact that he is a Jedi Master, and he can train Luke in all the ways of the Jedi. He can train him in formal lightsaber combat. He can train him in how to do stuff with the Force, etc. He doesn't seem particularly interested in doing any of that. He more or less just gets Luke, who's a more important figure to the destiny of the galaxy and a more decisive figure, started along his path, and then he lets Vader kill him, which I think kind of summarizes his own life. He's a decent man, a good man, a man who's idealistic and willing to die for his principles, but a man who's ultimately unwilling to make even the slightest compromise or seize any power for himself, even to pursue good ends. He's only willing to be a tool of others. And as I said, in another time, this would be entirely laudable. In another time, this would be great. This would make him a truly great man who would be a hero. But in an age of chaos, in an age of emperors and empires and revolutions, and an age of great men playing their Game of Thrones, he's kind of the Ned Stark of Star Wars. He's just completely out of his time and completely out of his league. And the saddest thing is he kind of realizes this. And he kind of has to watch as things degenerate around him, knowing he lacks the drive to really do much about it. So that's a profile of Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is Argent Templar signing out.